Well, he can't stay around here.
Oh, yeah? Well, where? Where are we going to take him?
Pick his ass up and drag him back where you found him at.
Well, that settles that.
A plane goes down in the Gobi Desert, and the survivors face starvation, thirst, and nomads as they struggle to survive. This week, we chat about wise words from Buzz Aldrin, how not to start an inspirational speech, and getting demoted from captain to mister. Then we find out if 2004's Flight of the Phoenix stands the test of time.
Test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? James says gladiator with a glut, and Alan says as a father blah blah. It's the test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? Test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Test of Time podcast. My name is Alan Noah, and with me, as always, not with me physically, but with me digitally and in spirit, is you, James.
Hey, how you doing, Al?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm good, Al. It's good to hear from you, and it's good to talk to you today.
Aw, it's weird not seeing you in person, but doing this over Skype or Google Hangouts is actually what we use. I don't know. I feel like we've gotten into like a decent rhythm with it. You know, it's going okay.
Yeah, and the saved game that you and I have, we do have a saved game that we've been playing through for a couple years now. It's still going. It's waiting for you. Next time it's safe to come over.
Wait. We beat it. We beat Super Mario World, didn't we?
We beat it, but we didn't beat it perfectly.
Oh, okay.
We still have the star map. Well, it's Star World, Star Map.
Special
whatever.
World.
The Special World. Yeah, the one that's in the shape of a star.
That's a Star World, but then from the center of the Star World, you go to the Special World.
And speaking of pandemic, I saw something recently. I happened to catch this concert that was on TV, the iHeartRadio Music Festival. This is the company that used to be known as Clear Channel, and they basically own a lot of regular public radio stations.
Terrestrial radio, right?
Yeah, and every year they have this traveling concert that they usually have that goes around like a couple times a year. It's in the summer, and then they have something called the Jingle Ball, and it was a huge concert. I mean, it had Coldplay and BTS, which is arguably the biggest band in the world right now that I don't know a single song of.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Also, it's the kind of thing where people that inevitably are one-hit wonders, they get to be on tour with like Beyonce and Taylor Swift, and it's a huge thing, and they usually sell out like the big stadiums in Chicago, New York, LA, all the big places.
Right. So they still did it this year during the pandemic?
Well, they did, but it was done with no audience. And these guys came out, and you could see the lighting on them, and, you know, it's all the, like, different colors, and they're sort of dancing, and there's this digital crowd of cheers, and when the third guy finally starts singing, like, the cheers get louder because they're waiting for that guy to cheer, and you know, you felt really bad for these guys, because Coldplay and BTS, they've sang for a lot of crowds, and they probably will for many years, but I felt bad when I happened to turn it on and I was looking at these three guys. I didn't know who they were, but it was some generic song that they were singing. And I was thinking, you know, these guys have a one-hit wonder. And the poor guys, you know, I'm not making fun of them for being one-hit wonders. I'm actually saying it's sad that they were supposed to have been at a sellout Madison Square Garden crowd. And instead they're dancing. And these television studios are always even way smaller than you think they are. So they're probably in some closet singing their big hit. Like the moment is going to be over in 6 months. And I just felt bad for these people.
I think that's fair. You know, obviously you feel worse for the people who have lost loved ones and the people who have lost their jobs. And that's the real tragedies of the pandemic. And, these entertainment related things are certainly smaller. When we were talking about the new Bill and Ted movie, we were saying how, boy, isn't that kind of a bummer that these guys have been waiting for decades to make this movie and it comes out during a global pandemic. And the Emmys were kind of a bummer this year too. I only watched the beginning, but they kind of had like the digital audience that you're talking about. And then Jimmy Kimmel was like, wait a second, there is no audience. This is all fake. Ha ha ha. I mean, everything is weird. Everything is different. And you're right. Some of these acts are never going to have another chance. There are probably people who won an Emmy this year, and the way they won it is by some guy showing up at their house. And that's not the real way. They want to be on the red carpet. They want to be there with the celebrities, and they don't get that chance. It's not the biggest tragedy of the pandemic, but you're right. It definitely does suck for these people.
I mean, we could always talk about the bigger tragedies, but, I was just looking at it and I just felt bad for these guys. It's not as bad as, say, crash landing in the Gobi Desert.
Well, that I don't know from experience, but I do know a thing or two about that because I just watched Flight of the Phoenix, the movie that you picked for this week, and a movie that not only had I never seen, I'd never heard of it. This movie came out in 2004. It went totally under the radar for me. I don't think I've ever seen like a movie poster of it or saw a trailer for it or really even knew that it existed. Why did you pick this movie?
Al, I actually totally agree with you. This movie had one of the worst marketing campaigns I've ever heard of. It's actually based on a 1965 hit that starred Jimmy Stewart, Richard Attenborough, Ernest Borgnine, and George Kennedy.
Ooh.
Yeah, and I didn't see it in the theaters like most people. This is one of those rare films that I specifically remember taking out from the library.
I get all my movies from the library. If it's not on a streaming service, I get it from the library.
Yeah, and I remember taking it out once, and I really liked it the first time I saw it, and then I never saw it again. And strangely, I never heard anyone ever talk about this film. And, I was pretty sure I had seen it, and I was pretty sure it existed. And, I eventually did actually watch the Jimmy Stewart original. It had been certainly a decade since I had seen either of these films, and I kind of forgot about them. And then I have HBO Max now, and I was just kind of going through some of the movies that were on there, and I saw Flight of the Phoenix, and I said, and I saw 2004, and I said, all right, it's 16 years old. Let's see if it held up, because I'm also curious, did this film deserve to be a box office bomb?
Well, we will discuss that as we get into the movie. And for people who haven't seen it, which I assume is virtually all of our listeners, maybe even 100% of our listeners, the movie is about a group of oil workers who crash land in the Gobi Desert. They have no radio, limited food and water, and their time is running out. Then, one mysterious man has a crazy idea to build another plane out of the original plane's remaining parts. Will this new plane, named the Phoenix, manage to take flight? You may use the name of the movie as you come up with your answer. Remember, the name of the movie is Flight of the Phoenix. So, you can kind of guess what happens. You already mentioned that this movie was a bomb, and the fact that I didn't even hear of it in 2004, there are plenty of movies from the early 2000s that I never saw, but usually I've at least heard of them. Was this just in and out of the theaters in a week or something?
Pretty much. I mean, if you ever watch the 1965 original, for the most part, it's the same general idea. You have to build a plane out of the other one. And I have to say that it's a brilliant idea to remake that film because it's a cool concept, but I will say that having seen the original after having seen this, while I find a lot of the original parts very intriguing that were not involved in this at all, special effects wise, it couldn't come close to what this was. This was a $45 million budget film, which is, not, out of the stratosphere, but they didn't really waste money on getting big name stars. They got Dennis Quaid and then, other people that had, a lot of acting credits. But, Hugh Laurie, we know him from House, but, I don't think he was demanding a lot of House money at this point.
No, he wasn't. I read in the IMDb trivia today that he auditioned for the role of House while making this movie. So this was like just before he got House.
Oh, yeah, and the movie came out in December of 2004. The film opened at number 7 with $5 million, and it only wound up making $21 million domestically and $35 million worldwide. So, yeah, it probably lost a bundle of money for the producers.
A whole bundle?
Yeah, and it's one of those things where whether or not the film is good, you got to look at the competition of what's coming out. And if you look at what was out Christmas week when this came out, you've got National Treasure, that's still in theaters, Ocean's 12, you got Polar Express and Meet the Fockers and A Series of Unfortunate Events. You've got Martin Scorsese and Leonardo DiCaprio in The Aviator. You've got Wes Anderson's The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou. Zissou, sorry. Blade Trinity. This film is just, it's totally lost. I mean, all of those films were big box office hits.
I think it's an interesting word you just used. You said this movie was lost. Also premiering in 2004 was the TV show Lost, which was about people who were on a plane that crashed and they were stranded. And then there were some other mysterious people. And could they get off of the island? These people had to work together and there were threats and et cetera, et cetera. There's definitely some overlap between that show and this movie. I also wonder if maybe that hurt this movie at the box office and people were really into Lost, like, oh, another plane crash survival thing.
Absolutely, because I don't remember all of Lost, but I do remember that the pilot of Lost might be one of the best pilots of any show I've ever seen. I mean, that was like a movie quality plane crash.
It was just something that crossed my mind. It's like, oh yeah, 2004. But let's get into this movie, Flight of the Phoenix. It starts at a oil drilling station somewhere in the Far East, and it's a bust. They're not getting oil. So this guy shows up to shut them down. It's Captain Towns, played by Dennis Quaid, and he's shutting them down, and they all have to just leave that day. That's it. It's their last day. They're fired. They're going home. And the woman who runs this rig is named Kelly Johnson. She's played by an actress named Miranda Otto, who I had never seen before. Looking her up on IMDb, she was in a couple of the Lord of the Rings movies. I didn't recognize her, but she's pissed off because this stranger has come in and is shutting her whole business down. But they all get on the plane, and as part of their little pre-flight ritual, Towns and his co-pilot, AJ, played by Tyrese Gibson, they do an impression of the Bills. It's Bill Clinton and Bill Cosby. Right away, this impression does not stand the test of time. This obviously takes place before Bill Cosby's rape allegations were well known, although they were known in the industry. It's not a bad Bill Cosby impression in terms of Tyrese sounds like Bill Cosby. Way to go, Tyrese Gibson. But yeah, it's kind of awkward from a 2020 point of view.
Yeah, that joke didn't hold up. But by the way, they've at the last second taken on one last additional passenger that no one really knows anything about. This is not the kind of place that there's going to be a transport very often. So they're like, you just kind of get on.
Someone says, who is this guy? And Kelly says, it's a long story. His name is Elliot. He's played by Giovanni Ribisi. And later we do get the quote unquote long story. And the long story is he just showed up one day. So it's actually not a long story. It's a very bizarre story, and Giovanni Ribisi plays this guy really well as just a strange, creepy dude who you don't know. Is he a psychopath? He kind of looks like a psychopath. Is he maybe just weird? He's just straight out of like central casting for the creepy guy.
I'll give you a little scenario here. It's 1965. The character who plays Giovanni Ribisi's character, he looks very similar. Very, very blonde and blue-haired, who shows up and talks like Giovanni Ribisi's character. What do you think this character's interesting backstory turns out to be?
He was a Nazi?
Yeah, he's a Nazi. So in this film, this character is not a Nazi. He certainly has that kind of Germanic, Austrian kind of accent, Eastern European. But he's definitely played based on the original character. I'll agree with you. They don't really give you any fulfillment of what this character's mysterious background is.
Right. So he gets on the plane. There's a storm.
A sandstorm.
Right, a sandstorm, yes. And Captain Towns thinks that they can fly through it. They try to fly over it. They are not successful. The plane goes down. I guess it's a thrilling sequence. The effects are good. The plane ends up crashing. One guy falls out of the plane like during the crash. Another guy is killed on impact. And shortly after, they're on the ground, they're in the desert, they don't know what to do. The first night, one of the guys gets up to take a leak, and then he kind of just gets stuck in a sandstorm, and he dies. And very quickly, there's two schools of thought about what to do. Either they hunker down, sit tight, and wait for somebody to rescue them, or Elliot, the mystery guy, Giovanni Ribisi, he says that they can take the broken parts of the plane and use it to assemble a new plane, which they can use to fly out. Towns thinks that's a bad idea because if they're working really hard, they're going to be drinking more water and eating more food, and they only have a limited amount of both. So he thinks they should just conserve their energy, drink as little water as possible, and sooner or later, someone's going to find them. It's an interesting debate. Do you try to do something or do you do nothing? But it goes on way too long. Way too long.
I mean, there's an interesting quote that I read about Buzz Aldrin. Do you know who Buzz Aldrin is, Al?
Never heard of the guy. Sounds like a loser.
No, he's second man on the moon.
I don't believe anyone's ever been on the moon. Definitely no one cares about it, though.
Sigh. Well, anyway, someone once asked him, if you were in a spacecraft and it's hurling towards the sun and the engine is totally kaput and you only had an hour to live, what would you spend your last hour doing? And you know what his answer was?
What?
I'd be working on the engine. His idea was I'd still be working to do something. So I think they also come to the realization that nobody's looking for them because this is the Gobi Desert. They don't even know if they're in China or Mongolia. They're like 200 miles off course. Like maybe they sent one plane to look. And even the Hugh Laurie character, he kind of does a cost-benefit analysis. He realizes, yeah, they're going to make sure they did their due diligence to send a search plane, but they're not going to send 25 planes. They realize also that walking is not possible because there's nowhere to walk for hundreds of miles, and you can even walk past the city and you never even know it and keep walking in the desert. They really have two options: either eventually die in the desert, dying of thirst in a couple weeks, or they can put their minds to something and they will run out of water probably in 2 weeks.
Right. And Towns is really against this idea of building the new plane, and he comes around because Kelly gives a little bit of a hopes and dreams speech. doesn't really do anything for him. But then one of the other guys, this guy Liddell, he goes off walking. And he wasn't supposed to do that because of literally all the reasons you just said. It's a suicide mission. But Towns goes after him. He finds Liddell, and Liddell says, all you need is someone to love. Or if you don't have someone to love, you need something to believe in. And if you don't have something to believe in, you just need something to do. And that's sort of like the Buzz Aldrin quote you were getting at. And Towns is like, fine, we'll build the damn thing. But they also find the body of the one passenger who like flew out of the plane while they were crashing, and it's filled with bullet holes. So he's like, someone was using this body for target practice. Which, by the way, how do you use a corpse for target practice? Like, the guy was dead on impact. Like, did they just prop him up and shoot him more? Like, that just seems like a bad thing to shoot at. I mean, I'm not saying it's better to shoot at a live person, but I just don't see what's the fun in shooting someone who's already dead.
A shooting range is usually going to be, I mean, it could be a target, concentric circles, but also you'll see like the outline of a human. Yeah, I mean, from the top of the mountain, they're probably like, yeah, let me see if I could shoot between his eyes. That's what they were aiming at. The poor guy was riddled with bullets.
I guess. But yeah, so then they get going. There's maybe a couple of building the plane montages. They're working really hard. They are working at night at first because that way it will be darker and less hot and they'll use less water. But then they need to light fires so they can see what they're doing. There's a big explosion when a spark hits like a gas canister. I really thought a couple of characters died in that explosion, but apparently not. They were just far enough away and it was a scary thing, but no one died. I don't know. I thought maybe that would have been an interesting way to up the stakes a little bit, to have a character die or maybe just, like get severely injured. But no, everyone was fine.
I agree. In the construction of the plane, you would think that in a film like this, there's going to be someone whose life is going to be sacrificed to build this plane. And there are a number of close calls, but there's no one who dies for the sake of building the plane.
Right. I mean, the process goes fairly well after that. They have to fuse the two wings together. For some reason, they insist on having the chef align the two parts of the wings, which they don't explain at all. I was very, very confused by that. They're like, chef, we need you. You need to be in there. And then the one part of the wing slides down and they think he's crushed. And then he shows up and he's like, no, I'm okay. I'm just the chef. And it's like, right, you are just the chef. Why did they stick you in there? They could have even said, because you're little or you have small hands that we need or something. But there was no reason. I found that very, very odd.
Yeah, you're exactly right. They needed one sentence of because blank.
Exactly.
They didn't include it, but yeah, it's a cool scene, and you don't even quite understand this guy's idea because he's talking about putting the fuselage here, and it slowly starts to come together, like how they're actually going to build a plane out of the parts that they have in that plane.
Right. There's a we're having fun while we're building the plane montage where they're listening to Hey Ya by Outkast. Great song, which totally stands the test of time.
Absolutely. But also, I thought it was a good song because, yeah, for a moment, these guys are going to have a good time. They're probably so PTSD'd from all of this. And for about 3 minutes, yes, they are actually, remember when we used to smile and dance? And yeah, I'll bet you that actually was a good few minutes for them.
Yeah. And you see Ian kind of hitting golf balls into the desert, which also reminded me of Lost. That was a thing that, was it Jack who did that? Who would hit the golf balls on the island? I don't remember, but someone did that in Lost. You see their bathroom, which is just a sign that says vacant and occupied, and a shovel that they just kind of go over a sand dune and take the shovel. And then they decide to name this new plane the Phoenix because of the creature from mythology that rises from the ashes and takes on a new form. It makes sense. I did like the gag when the guy's painting the word Phoenix on the plane and someone's like, did you spell that right? Because it is one of those words that like you always look at and are like, wait, is that right? Oenix? Wait, yeah, that's right. Is that right? I think that's right.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good line.
Yeah. Then there's an electrical storm, and it nearly kills Elliot because the plane isn't grounded. And at that point, Towns says, how does this guy not know that the plane should be grounded? Because, I don't think we mentioned it, Elliot has said that he knows how to design this plane because he's a plane designer. That's his job. So he knows all about this. He's the perfect guy to come up with this plan. But then it's a little strange that he wouldn't think to ground the plane. And it's suspicious, but then they completely let it go and don't bring it up again until like an hour later in the movie.
Right. Well, they don't bring it up because Elliot is really starting to assert logical dominance here, because he's saying things like, everybody here is dispensable but me. And there's kind of a struggle there because for the most part, people have been following the orders of Captain Towns because they're just following the chain of command from the airplane. But, it's no longer, the flight out of the oil field.
Right. And Towns's leadership kind of comes into question when they encounter this group of nomads or wanderers or arms dealers or someone. We don't know who they are. Again, with the Lost comparison, it made me think of The Others. And they decide they're going to go and talk to them. This seems horrifically stupid because they found that corpse riddled with bullets that someone was using for target practice. They know that whoever did that is in the general vicinity of them. These people might be friendly, but they might not be. They seem to think that they probably won't be. And Towns is like, no, let's go over and talk to them anyway. Elliot suggests against it. And Elliot was right. These guys are dangerous. They go over there. It's the same people who killed the other guy. We know that because one of them was wearing the watch that dead guy had. And there's a shootout. One more of our characters dies. I honestly forget the guy's name.
Alex.
Okay. And then Towns and the other good guys, they're able to kill virtually all of the other bad guys. But one guy gets away and one guy is wounded. So they take the wounded guy back to their camp and they're not sure what should they do. Should they use all of their water to help him? Should they not? And then Elliot just walks over to him and kills him and says, well, now we don't have to worry about it. Debate over.
Yeah, Elliot is a cold, logical character, and it probably came across differently in the original one when he does something like this and he's a Nazi, but here he's just talking completely logically. He's saying, look, these guys tried to kill us. He's dying anyway. He would only survive another couple days anyway, and the only thing he would do is drink our water. So if you guys are confused about it and I'm not confused about it, I'll just make that easier. He doesn't even explain any of that. He just goes, that takes care of that.
Right. And then Towns calls him a murderer, and Elliot's like, no, you're the murderer because you went over there. I told you not to. You are not the leader. I should be in charge. Towns punches him because, he's big, strong Dennis Quaid, and Elliot's his little, scrawny Giovanni Ribisi. And Elliot gets really mad that he got punched, and then he says, I'm not going to help build the plane anymore. Everyone needs to tell me how much they appreciate me. Everyone needs to beg and say, please. This is him exerting his dominance and fine, whatever. But this scene also goes on way too damn long where they have every character say please, sometimes 2 or 3 times in order for Elliot to decide that he will continue to help them. Like, I get it in terms of the story, but it's just really, really dragged out.
Yeah, and I like how he calls Captain Towns Mr. Towns to really put it down like, I am demoting you. You are no longer have the rank of captain, aka leader.
So a demotion from captain is Mr.?
Oh, absolutely.
What about like lieutenant or something?
I think to purposely call someone known as Captain Towns Mr. Towns would be purposely trying to lower their status.
Okay, fair enough. But after they all kiss Elliot's ass, they get back to work, they finish the Phoenix, and then Towns is looking for something, and Elliot's like, oh, it's in my bag. And then when Towns goes to get it, he sees this pamphlet of model airplanes. And it turns out that Elliot isn't a designer of real airplanes, but of model airplanes. And this is the big dun, dun, dun secret reveal. This is a shocking moment where we finally find out Elliot's true backstory. And I was just so underwhelmed. He makes toys? I don't know. That's not like the most shocking, horrifying thing. I get it that they would be pissed. I mean, I understand why that's a letdown for the characters, but I just felt like it wasn't that huge of a cinematic twist, you know?
It's not that, and he's a Nazi.
Right. If he was also a Nazi, that would have been a bigger twist. Just the fact that he's really good at making toys, I thought was pretty anticlimactic. But then there's a sandstorm and the Phoenix is buried and they're like, oh, we were so close. We could have finished it. We did finish it, but then it got buried. And then now's the time for Towns to deliver his rousing speech. Earlier in the movie, it was Kelly and then Liddell. Now it's his time. And I wrote down what he said because when I first heard this speech, I laughed out loud. The dialogue is so bad. He says, we're not garbage. We're people with families and lives to live. All of us. Like, just when he says, we're not garbage, we're people, like, that's how you inspire people? No one said they were garbage. I mean, they did way earlier in the movie that, like, oh, we're the garbage and, like, the real valuable stuff on the plane is the scraps and it's more valuable than the people. Like, that word had been said, but no one had said it to these characters in, I don't know, days, weeks. So if you're trying to rally the troops, the first words out of your mouth shouldn't be, we're not garbage. That's not exactly inspirational.
Yeah, I agree. It wasn't the halftime speech that you were looking for. When we review Any Given Sunday, that's a halftime speech.
Right.
So after all these setbacks, once again, they're finally able to dig the plane out of the sand, although they're kind of worried that the engine might now be full of sand. But they are able to pull it out, and it's pretty cool. They kind of have all these men with cables on themselves and, you know, using the power of, how many are there? There's like 10 of them, right?
Something like that. Maybe 8. I don't know. Give or take that ballpark.
Yeah, and they pull this out, and they kind of have a runway. And earlier in the film, we had seen Elliot walk over to the edge of a canyon, implying that there's going to be not enough space. And he goes, we'll have to compensate. And now suddenly they've brought this plane out to the runway, and all of a sudden, the smugglers are there. They're back. And greater in numbers, just like the Sand People.
Right, because the one guy who got away brought a bunch of his friends, and now Towns has to ignite the engine, and they have 5 of these canisters in order to do it. And when Elliot hands Towns the canisters, he says, good luck, you only have 5 chances at this. Which also made me laugh out loud, because the thing you say in a movie is, good luck. We've only got 1 shot at this. But no, he's got 5 shots at it. And like a lot of other things in this movie, they just draw it out. And the first one doesn't work. The second one, spoiler alert, doesn't work. The third one, wait for it, doesn't work.
But then he decides, since the first 3 have not worked, I'm not going to try again. I think the engine is totally flooded. So I'm going to fire the 4th one with the vents open. So it's just going to flush out the entire system. And then we'll have 1 more. So I agree, there should have been 1 fewer.
Fine, but they really dragged that out way too goddamn long. Again, the name of the movie is Flight of the Phoenix. We know the stupid Phoenix is going to take flight. You don't need to extend this moment by an extra 10 minutes for no reason. as you would expect, as they get the plane going, all of the bad guys start charging them because they realize they're going to take off. They shoot at the plane. The rudder breaks. Elliot goes and fixes it. That's his moment of redemption. He doesn't die in the process, which might have been more interesting for the character if that's the way he redeems himself, but he fixes it. He's able to hold on because they're all like holding on to the top of the plane, kind of like a hang glider. They're not like sitting inside it.
But also with assumingly compensating weights on each side of the wing. I'm sure Elliot decided who's going to be on each wing and at what position.
Right. That's a fair point. But yeah, so the plane is moving. It goes over the cliff. It's a solid 4 count. I did to 4 Mississippi before. You see the plane triumphantly come up over the horizon. They made it. It worked. Yeehaw. And the plane goes off into the sunset. And then there's a little like epilogue where you see some snapshots of their lives after they get back to civilization. The one guy who said he was going to open up a salsa shop with his wife, he does that. And Towns and AJ open up a airline or a airport or something, whatever. Kelly, she's working on a rig in the ocean somewhere. Elliot is like NASA's New Hope in some magazine cover. They all go on to live happily ever after. And that's it. That's the end of the movie. So, James, this was your pick, Flight of the Phoenix. I'll ask you first. Do you think this movie stands the test of time?
Something that you bring up that is very true is one thing I really don't like about this film that does not stand up for me is the name of the film. It's a spoiler. Mm-hmm. It's a really bad spoiler. I didn't even consider that, but you're right. Like you're waiting for this flight. Maybe it's a question of how many people will survive till this thing takes flight, but it's gonna take off.
Right.
That being said, I think it really does stand up. I think it's a thrilling idea. I think it's a very well acted, and I really like what you said about how Hugh Laurie had auditioned for House like concurrently with this film. So he was an unknown, and he's very good in this film. And Tyrese is, maybe not as good as Hugh Laurie and Dennis Quaid, but all the characters are perfectly fine. I think the acting is good, but it doesn't need to be great. And I really like that the character Kelly, they very smartly do not decide that, oh, there's a woman. We have to get her romantically involved with Captain Towns or anyone else. They don't go there at all. I agree they should have had a couple cannon fodder deaths to make a couple things more thrilling. But, overall, I think it's a very exciting movie. One thing I do not like, a lot of films do this, whenever an airplane kind of goes off the edge and then the camera is kind of on the other side of the mountain on the safe edge, and where's the plane? Where's the plane? There's the plane as it safely comes zooming past the camera. I've seen this in a lot of films. Superman Returns had this. It's kind of a trope, and I never find it interesting. I don't think the epilogue is really needed. And I was thinking when Elliot's character kills the smuggler, I wonder, do they turn Elliot in? Like, do they tell the authorities, like, this guy killed someone in cold blood and maybe didn't have to? Or do they kind of have a pact, like, we're just not going to talk about that, or we're going to have a different story of why he was shot? And then, the fact that it says NASA's New Hope, it kind of shows like, oh, maybe they didn't care. Or maybe he's, our own von Braun. He was the Nazi rocket scientist that we stole from the Nazis that helped develop the Apollo program, pretty much. But I thought the epilogue was fine. And I thought the film was pretty thrilling. So I'm going to say, yeah, it does stand the test of time. And I think the film was terribly marketed. It could have been cut better. I'm not saying the film is perfect. This could have been directed and maybe edited better. But I think the good parts are good. Dennis Quaid is as good as always. And the music is good. And I had a good time watching it. What do you think, Al? Do you think this film stands the test of time?
I'm going to answer your question with another question. Why do you make me watch this garbage? Like, this is fucking awful. This movie is just terrible. No, it doesn't stand the test of time. Here's the entire plot of this movie. A plane goes up, a plane crashes. Should they fix it or should they do nothing? They debate it. Then they fix it. Then they take off. That's it. Like, that's everything that happens in this movie. The plot is paper thin. It has no interesting characters. The only way that I remember any of the characters' names is because I had the IMDb page up on my laptop. Otherwise, I wouldn't have known Liddell from Alex from any of them. Like, what is the interesting thing about any of these characters? Do any of them really have an arc or a journey? No, it's just some stuff that happens. I've made a bunch of comparisons to Lost. This kind of story does work better serialized because then you can draw it out, you can get to know the characters, you can understand their quest for survival, it can up the stakes a little bit. Here, there are no stakes. In very large part because of the spoiler title, I know it's going to take off. As you said, James, but the question is, who's going to be on the Flight of the Phoenix? How many of these characters will make it? That's a good point, and that's a good question, except I don't give a shit about any of these characters. They are worthless to me, so I don't care when Billy or Tommy or Joe or whoever dies because they mean nothing to me. So, you know, that's kind of a problem right there. Watching this movie made me think of two things. One was the Poseidon Adventure. And when we reviewed that movie, I remember being frustrated by the great debate in that movie of, should we stay here and wait to be rescued, or should we move and try to go up the ship? And as it turns out in that movie, they should be moving. They should be doing something. And it's fine to have that conversation, but they beat it to death over and over and over and over again. It takes up a lot of screen time in the Poseidon Adventure. Similarly, that same debate, should we do something or should we do nothing, takes up a ton of screen time in this movie. Yeah, you can have that conversation, but get it over with. We know you're going to do something. Don't drag it out. This movie was about 2 hours long, give or take. I forget the exact runtime. I was bored out of my mind. Everything goes on too long. That debate goes on too long. The 5 cylinders, the please, 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 like all of this stuff just goes on and on and on. It's really not necessary. Oh, I said this movie reminded me of two things. The second thing, do you remember that Diet Coke break commercial from the mid-90s?
With the guy that would like take off his shirt and the women would watch him drink a Diet Coke?
Exactly. If you liked that commercial, you'll love this movie. This movie has lots of good-looking men, shirtless, sweating, eye candy. If that's your thing, great. I know many men and women who would very much enjoy that sort of thing. You will like this movie. Lots of sweaty guys with pecs and abs and biceps and not a square inch of body hair among all of them combined. Great. But, you know, plot and interesting characters, story, none of that. I will say, like, visually it looked cool, like the effects of the crash and the desert vistas and stuff. It looked nice. It shot well, but I was bored out of my skull, man. This movie deserved to be a flop. I didn't enjoy it at all. So, no, it does not stand the test of time.
Okay, you know, I hear what you're saying in terms of the characters. I totally agree with you there. The characters do not grab you as individual characters. I disagree. I think the plot is very intriguing. I think the concept of will this work or not is very cool. I think the film should have been named like The Phoenix or something. And you could have read later, oh, it's an homage to Flight of the Phoenix, 1965. Like, I do agree that that probably shouldn't have been in the title. The characters that do die, I agree. I didn't care if any of them died.
Right. One interesting fact I saw, the original movie is called The Flight of the Phoenix, whereas this movie is just Flight of the Phoenix. They just lopped off the first the. Why? I don't know. It fits on the poster easier, I guess. I don't know.
Maybe they should have lopped off both of them, and it could have just been called Flight of Phoenix.
I think you're right. They should have not had the word flight on there. If they had just said The Phoenix or I don't know.
They should have called it Lost in the Gobi Desert.
Yeah, there you go. Well, that's going to do it for us this week. Join us next week when we are going to be talking about The Witches, the 1990 movie based on the Roald Dahl book in honor of the 2020 movie that's also based on the Roald Dahl book. We're going to talk about the 1990 movie. You know, good to get in the Halloween spirit, I guess.
Yeah, it should be fun.
Yes, it will be fun. As always, we want you to talk to us. We are at Test of Time Pod. Have you ever seen Flight of the Phoenix? Did you know what this movie was? Are you going to see it after you heard me explain how terrible it is and heard James talk about its virtues? Spoiler alert, you shouldn't. But it is on HBO Max if you're so inclined. Yeah, and we'll see you next time, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye.